Okay, so again, my name is Nico, and I am really excited to have all five of these folks introduce themselves to everybody. And so I'm going to ask that the panelists, sort of in whatever order makes sense to you, to introduce yourself by sharing your name, your pronouns if you want, when you were at UIC, including when you graduated and what program you were in. And what is your current job situation? Is it easier if I call on people? Okay, let's go. Let's go with Javin first.
Thank you. And also, hi, this is Javin. I put it in the chat in case folks need access to it. So my name is Javin D'Souza. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. Either one is totally fine. I was at UIC between 2021 to 2024. I was pursuing I graduated May of last year, and I pursued my master's degree in urban higher education. And I had the esteemed privilege of working at the DCC as a graduate assistant for 2 years. So it's great to see you all in that room and all together. My current job situation is basically once I graduated in May, I was job hunting for about 3 months and I landed a role that I'm still currently in. I work at Northwestern University in downtown Chicago, and I'm a faculty affairs coordinator for the Department of Medical Social Sciences. And yeah, that's my current job situation. I've been there for about 7 months. I'm also a manager of a small team, so that's interesting since it's my first real like full-time job. Um, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Great. Thank you, Javin. Jordan, we'll just sort of go right in the order it is on our screen.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jordan Alcantar. She, her pronouns are fine. I was at UIC for undergrad and grad school. So for undergrad was 2016 to 2020. What a great year to graduate. And I studied Latin American and Latino studies, anthropology, and a minor in disability and human development. And then I actually went straight into my master's, so I didn't apply for full-time jobs till after my master's. And I did Latin American Latino studies, and I also worked for the DCC my senior year of undergrad and both years of my grad school. So I'm very fortunate to also work for the center as well. After my master's, for over 2 years, I worked for a nonprofit, and then I currently work for the University of Illinois. I think it's been around 9 months now. It's like time flies so much. So I work at the University of Illinois for the Jeffrey Center, which is an academic support program centered on underrepresented students in higher education. And I'm the first student success advisor for the first generation student initiatives. So I'm an advisor. I will focus on first gen students. And yeah, that's me.
Sylvie.
Hi, my name is Sylvie Rosenkalt. I'll just wait for the interpreter. My pronouns are she, hers, and I was at UIC doing my master's between 2019 and 2021, in special education, although I took about half of my courses in disability studies, just trying to get as much of that as I could. Um, And I'm currently the accessibility coordinator at the Museum of Science in Boston. So I've been in this role almost 2 years, and it's a really interesting job that I never expected I would have. I didn't think about the museum field, but it is a field where accessibility is, there are jobs around accessibility. I'll just say that, and I'll stop there for now.
Me?
Hi everyone, my name is Me. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. I was at UIC for my Master's of Social Work from 2022 to 2024. I also had the privilege of working with folks at the DCC as a graduate assistant. I think I was hired on right after Javin, actually. So, like, heard the lore, but never got to interact fully. But then. Yeah, after I graduated in 2024, I was hired as a therapist, and so I worked full time as a therapist at a private practice in the city. Um, but yeah, so that has been interesting. It's been also for me, I think similar to Jordan, it's been about like 9 months for me as well.
Thank you. And Merrick.
Hi everyone, my name is Merrick. My pronouns, he, they. Other one is fine. Started at UIC in about 2019. Now I studied my pro PhD. In learning sciences. So really studies how humans learn, essentially, is what I study. My research focused on and autism. Focused on autism.
From a disability studies
From a disability
perspective.
studies perspective. I finished on May of 2024. And for the last 2 months, I've been working for a nonprofit organization called Communication First. I've also been teaching part-time for a small college in California.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. And so the first question that we have, right, is for any of the panelists, sort of in any order, whatever feels good, and I'm putting it in the chat. How did you decide to handle disclosure? So that could be your disability status, your access needs, or something else disability related in the application process, interviewing, or once hired, or all three, sort of any of those things, what feels the most pertinent to you? How did you handle these things? Whoever would like to start, that's totally good. I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
All three of them. For my situation, if I apply for a job, and they say specifically I want a disabled person, I will tell them. If the job itself does not say we want a disabled person in the description, I will decline them. The interview process. I will suspend my communication requires access, and I'll let them know, but typically I will not disclose that information right away. Or I will not say I have a disability immediately, but I'll say I require access. But I will not say what specifically my disability is. And then if I'm already hired, I prefer to have that written down from a doctor's note. Or physical therapist or whatever it may be. That was it. So, and anyone with some kind of license, and then I will give that to the HR department. So I typically, I don't know what to tell people, my specific, but this is going to be the way. That's, you know. Well, sometimes we'll accept some kinds of disabilities, but not others. So I didn't want to be discriminated against right before, so I try to prevent that from happening. And then eventually I will disclose it. But my job now, of course, with communication first, the organization itself is by and for disabled people. So, you know, of course I told them. So that's a different situation.
This is Sylvie. Adding on to that, I have a similar process of saying that I have a disability, but not specifying what it is. So for jobs in my field in disability services, they're often looking for someone with experience with a disability. And so I will say in my cover letter that I do identify as disabled, and depending on the type of job, like if it was I used to work with high school students, I might say something like, I went through high school with a disability. Or if it's working with college students, I might say, I went through college with a disability, but I'm not giving details about what it is or what accommodations I might need. I'm just using it as almost leverage, like another skill that I have that I'm showing. And then later on, to me, the question of getting accommodations is separate from just disclosing that you have a disability as part of the job process. So I wait to give details on the kinds of things that I need until I have the job and I've negotiated all of the pay and things like that and benefits.
I can, oh,
Thanks, Jordan. This is Javin. Excuse me. So for disability disclosure, I guess I'll go through all three kind of briefly. But basically, in application materials, so for context, I wanted to stay in higher education, so I only applied to institutions of higher education. And since a lot of institutions of higher education, sorry, are 501(c)(3) slash federal contractors, they have a goal of retaining and hiring disabled people, like a 7% goal, I believe, is like the federal standard if you're a federal contractor. So in the application, they ask, like, do you have a disability? They don't ask you to disclose or anything, or they don't ask you what type. They do list typically the types of disabilities, but it's not, it's not exhaustive. So that's the only place in my materials that I actually indicated that. And to Sylvie's point, I think in a way you have to sort of be strategic about when you disclose, because you never know who's on the other side reading your application. But yeah, that's as far as I went in terms of disclosing on application materials. In interviewing, it didn't come up necessarily because in part because the jobs that I was applying to weren't disability focused. So I didn't really disclose anything there. And if it did come up, I would have disclosed it just because of who I am. But since it didn't come up, I didn't disclose it. And then once I was hired, part of the reason I wanted to work in higher education was because as a student, I relied a lot on disability services, and I knew that higher education institutions also had the same service for staff usually. So like an employee like disability services division. And so I actually didn't talk to my supervisor um, at all about my disability accessibility needs. Um, I went through the university like employee services, uh, who handles accommodations. I forgot what it's called. I think it's the Office of Civil Rights at Northwestern. And when I basically just submitted a form and um, you know, with all my disability experiences, I provided the documentation that they requested. Basically, it was up to the disability services person to negotiate with use my request to negotiate with my supervisor and the department administrator about where they could meet me, or like how they could meet my access needs. And I'm grateful to say that they actually did meet all of my requests, which isn't always the case. But yeah, so I actually didn't talk to my supervisor at all. Like the disability services person reached out to her to like initiate that conversation. So again, this is like a higher ed context as well, and it may not apply to other kinds of organizations. Yeah.
This is Jordan. For me, I'm actually in a similar boat where I'm more focused on higher education. I've had also, even my nonprofit experience is still more higher education related anyway. I would say, um, during the actual application process, I did mark that I had a disability in my applications. But I was a little strategic when it came to the cover letters. I think depending on where I was applying to, like I did apply from some more disability specific organizations and centers. Then I explained like I have the lived experiences of being disabled while also advocating and working with other disabled people. But if it was not a very disability specific place, I honestly chose not to add that to my cover letter. Um, I just explained like just overall the different areas of intersectionality I have worked with and have expertise in or just studied and all that stuff. But I don't know, I was a little more on the cautious side for me personally. Um, in the application process, did not really come up too much in the interview process. But then again, I'm also somebody who does not, I have non-apparent disabilities. I can't speak to the experience of folks who have more apparent disabilities. Um, so I'm able to kind of mask a little bit more, like I mask a little bit more in a lot of situations, especially in interviews, just like kind of hiding a lot of my neurodivergent tendency, like activity, sorry, neurodivergent, like, I can't say the word right now, but sometimes it comes up in the way I like talk or react to things. So I try to like, I more for safety reasons, try to hide that sometimes. And then once I've gotten the jobs, I would say for my last, because this is my second full-time job, my last full-time job, I honestly did not trust HR to disclose my disabilities at all. Um, since I've talked to other disabled coworkers and they had really bad experiences. If they see this video, I don't care, I guess. Um, I highly doubt it, but I felt more comfortable talking about my access needs with my supervisor without the legal protections than I did with HR. Um, I think they were very not disability friendly as much as they claim they were. But for my current job, very similar to what Javin just said, since I work for a university, there's a disability resource center. Well, it's a different name at my school, but disability resource center that's for students, and then the staff have their own separate center. I have a medical diagnosis, but I'm having problems with stuff. So I right now I just chose to also just explain access needs with my supervisor. But I actually had really good talks with my current HR rep of like the process of going through the center for my official accommodations. So I felt good that if I once I do decide to actually like send my paperwork to them and like talk to the representative, that I feel like I know what the steps are, but I felt like I wanted to wait a little longer and kind of try my best to explain things to my boss without I don't disclose any specifics. And I felt very um supported so far with my like team, but I'm lenient more on the I just proceed with caution a little bit more now, the older I've gotten, and especially in our current climate. So that's kind of like where I'll just pause there.
Yeah, so I'm in a like I said, I'm a therapist, and so a lot of like my field is also a little bit different than being in kind of like a more structured environment. When I've had a lot of experiences with various supervisors and practices that I worked at that were very varied in their accommodations as also and also just like their um, just like ableist tendencies. And so on one hand, the structure of my job itself is very flexible. Like I work mostly from home. I'm able to control my schedule and my hours in a lot of various ways, but also the actual job requires a lot of just like other types of labor and kind of like balancing like hourly paycheck versus like benefits. And so when I went into like in the application materials and in the interviewing after I graduated, I was very, very upfront. I didn't name my disabilities. I think that is similar. I like didn't specify unless it was very relevant because I also am doing therapy work and doing work specifically for Sigma, disabled, queer, and trans people of color. And so, because it is relevant to my work, I would mention it when it was necessary. But otherwise, I would speak from a perspective of like it is really important for me to find a values aligned practice in which I can do my work because I have experiences not being able to do this work. And so the current practice that I'm at has been like very accommodating, and it is because I like very strongly negotiated in my way in, and made it very, very clear that these are the things that I need. Um, I will be honest, I do think that I have strong-armed my way through this entire process, but I think that is a skill that is like again, like necessary as part of this is like not just asking for what you need, but also demanding it in a specific way and leveraging your skills and abilities in order to say that like I bring this amount to the table and this is how I'm benefiting your institution. Therefore, you need to give me these things if you're going to keep me as a candidate. And so just like also understanding that like uh I think like one of the things that I've tried to like keep in mind, especially during the interviewing process, is that like you're interviewing them as much as you are being interviewed. And like as a disabled like worker, I think it is so important to be keeping that in mind of just like you don't have to sign on to these contracts in order to like be more like legally oppressed by this environment that is going to like work you to the core because that is what capitalism is. And so I think it has been very important to kind of like do that in the application materials as well as during the interviewing. I'd say like for me, like I don't know if I'm answering the question and getting a little off track, but in the application materials, I like only mention what's necessary. During the interviewing process, I've become a lot more aggressive about like what information I need from them, what do I need in order to consider them as an option, what do they need from me. And then once I'm hired, I just continue on kind of the firmness of like standing by your own side, and standing up for what you need. Um, but yeah.
Thank you all so much for those responses. They were great. And I do love that we have actually some variation, but also similarities across people. So thank you. And the next question we have, put it in the chat. Is now that you have talked about the application process, interviewing and being hired, I know that some folks said that they were relatively new, but like, how is it working out now? Right? So how is your position now with respect to disability?
So this is me. I'll just pick up from kind of what I was already getting into. Um, so again, I think I'm in a bit of a different like working environment than I think the other folks here on this panel, which I think is great to hear from multiple perspectives. The working as a therapist, I currently am it's an hourly position, so a lot of the work here actually feels very similar to working freelance. And so freelance has a lot of pros and a lot of cons. And I think one of the things that I'm also realizing is that as flexible as it can be and as helpful as that is for like me, if I really need to take a day off, then like I have the power to move things in order to take the day off. Um, but the con of that is like that day I probably just won't get paid. Right. And so then balancing that, I think, is something to keep in mind as we think about like what is actually more accommodating. Is it getting a salary and like having consistency and then maybe a little bit less flexibility in the schedule, or like the opposite of that, or is like you have a lot of flexibility with your schedule, which is helpful for my physical illnesses and like chronic pain, but then also then like you give up a little bit of that like financial security in the overarching. And so I think for me right now, it is it has been a very like big learning curve and a learning process. Um, I am like weighing out the different pros and cons and options for myself in terms of like what is actually more accommodating for me. I think it can be different for a lot of folks, depending on the time of their lives as well. And so I think it's working out again to a degree, because I have also advocated to like get air purifiers like in our office, get like masks, K95 masks in our office. And like again, that strong arming of like demanding these accommodations for myself as well as my clients. And so there's been wins and successes there that are to be celebrated, as well as like my work, the nature of my work is very heavy, especially in the time right now. And so needing to balance like a little bit more rest and like how do we put that in there, schedule that in along with work. So it is a give and take, I think.
This is Sylvie. Going on that same route of thinking about hourly versus salary and pay and part-time and full-time, I think when I look at my career as a whole, um, I feel that I'm unpaid. And I think that I there's a history of that because of time that I took off for medical leave when I wasn't working or when I was working just a couple hours a week. Um, so something that I've learned now that I've been in this position for a couple years and I know HR a little bit better is that I could have negotiated more and better for my current position than I did. Um, so I wanted to share this resource for anyone who is in the access work field, but um, this is like a study on different amounts of pay that access workers make across the country. Um, and just doing like some research and finding out what other people in your field are charging or what they make, especially if you've been out of work because of disability, or like you haven't worked in a couple years and so you may not know like what the going rate is now. Um, and then also thinking about that salary versus hourly. So I'm also hourly and I work 4 days a week, which is really great for my body. But it's also just like less pay than if I was working 5 days a week. And sometimes I wonder what the actual difference in like work that I would put in would be if I said I was working one more day, like would it really change that much? So yeah, just something to think about is that most of the time, if you're hourly, you're going to be paid worse than someone who's salaried. And that there's an expectation that if you're salaried, you're going to work more than 40 hours a week. But that's an expectation, that's not a rule. And if you work somewhere where you can get your job done in less than 40 hours a week, but you have a salary, that's a totally fine way to work. So, yeah, and just know that don't think of your disability as part of the negotiation. Like the accommodations that they're going to give you is separate from how much you should be paid. And so, like, go into it with the feeling of, I deserve this and I deserve to be paid fairly for my labor. Yeah.
So I yeah, I would like to speak. Um, so in relation to that, and in relation to your point, for my part-time teaching job, I actually asked for accommodations in contrast. Yeah, in contrast. So in California, so the college is a smaller private institution, so they don't have a separate HR like department. There's only one there's only one.
One dean.
There's only one dean for the school. And they actually manage accommodations and accessibility and all of that. So I decided for myself, I would actually go meet with that person. And I didn't know if the dean would be friendly or not. I wasn't sure. So I decided before that meeting, actually, that I was going to request for an interpreter in my contract. And then they gave me, and then they provided an interpreter, which was great. And that was part of my negotiation. So right now, I know that that college, that they're more friendly towards accommodation, but before that meeting, I had no idea. And in that situation, I made the decision that was best for myself and what I wanted, included in that side, which was an interpreter for that negotiation. So in relation to that point, for my full-time position, I agree that if you're going to negotiate any sort of disability accessibility, you should wait. You should wait later until the hiring process is done, and then once you have that contract agreement and everything is fleshed out, then you should focus on your disability access. So then you can usually the company will accept things better if you do it that way. Yeah, so I think I agree with that. And for my full-time job, with communication first, they have a little bit more flexible time schedule, which means, so I work 40 hours every week, but I pick the time, and then I show like, okay, if I want to work maybe 6 hours on Monday, and then maybe 10 hours on Tuesday, it doesn't matter. I mean, we all can agree to do that. So I don't have to negotiate that at all. And that's our work culture. And for that, I think that's really, I think that's a positive for accessibility. I mean, many people, they don't always, not everyone with disabilities always, like have that accessibility. Like some people have kids, some people, they have other responsibilities and duties. And that's really, and so I think that's a positive for my work accessibility that I've been able to enjoy so far. And also with my job, I have everything full connection with the internet. I work remotely from home. So you know, I'm not required to go in person to work. So that also helps me with accessibility because, for example, I can establish um, everything that I need. Like for example, my work setting, I can have the table that I need. I can have accessible features in my home, so that's a positive, and it matches what my preferences are, and matches my needs. So yeah, I think I think that's it. Yeah, if someone else would like to take over.
I would say this is Jordan. For me, some to break it down a couple of points. One, I want to highlight for anyone who's interested in working in higher education, especially student affairs, like working directly with students and supporting students, which is my passion. Um, you're gonna for sure experience burnout. It's not even you're going to experience it. Um, and obviously come, it gets worse if you already are disabled, experience chronic illness, pain, etc. Um, and I think one thing to like help, and I don't know if I'll be in this exact position. I'm probably not gonna be in this type of position for the rest of my life. I still want to be in student affairs, but not necessarily like an advisor for the rest of my life. But um, I have to learn strategies of protecting my time and energy. But it's not like a traditional 9 to 5 where I just sit at a desk and just crank things out between those hours. Like I do work a lot of late hours. I actually sometimes do have to work on the weekends. I have to have really, sometimes you're not always prepared for the really intense conversations you're gonna have with students. Um, Even though I'm not a mental health, expert, like I sometimes have to shift gears a little bit, like, hey, or bring up a lot of like a lot of trauma is brought up to me anyway. Um, and then also, and I'm really grateful, and it's sad that I have to say it like that, that I have a really supportive team who's very like, please use your pay time off. Please you go on like your vacation time. If you're not feeling well, like please let me know right away. Like I'm really grateful that we kind of all, even to my own boss, I'm like, yo, like take a break. Like, to my own boss, like, because I could see it too. Like, it's like how we take care of each other in our spaces. And it's very unfortunate when I hear coworkers who don't have the same experiences. So for me, in terms of my disability, it is really hard. Like, yes, I work a full-time job, 40 hours a week. Sometimes it's really more than that, let's be honest. Um, but I do struggle in my personal life still in terms of taking care of myself, in terms of being social outside of just like campus related events. I still getting used to living in a completely new town. Um, so that's like the aspect I really want to like let students like other folks know if they're interested in this type of work too. Um, it's gonna be a lot harder to kind of maintain those boundaries and kind of like you have to like I need this time off. Like, don't like it took me, I struggle even not looking at my email sometimes when I have time off, just like focus on myself and my health. Um, but also, it's also in my position, um, constantly trying to also bring up disability and accessibility, also my job too, um, of how to make our programming and my advising more accessible and disability affirming, but also, um, just also helping my students like learn how to advocate for themselves in a variety of different ways, how to navigate the Disability Resource Center. I wish that my campus, I'm gonna be honest, I really wish we had like an actual disability cultural center like we do at UIC, and that's something I really miss. And I know they're still trying their best, and they do workshops and stuff. It's just not the same. So it's still, regardless of my position, always still advocating for people with disabilities, disabled people like myself, especially my students, our access needs. It's just like I'm trying very hard not to be totally burnt out, and then also being very cautious so that we're in a extra dangerous time of like the attacks on DEIA. Everyone forgets the A part of accessibility. Um, and a lot of students and staff and faculty being targeted. Um, you know, like being told that we shouldn't be in higher education, advocating for human rights, like we see like what's going on in Palestine and like the, arresting students, censorship. So I'm still navigating that myself in my position-related disability of like, oh, there's so much work I want to do and talk about, but I'm also so like I'm trying so hard not to crash all the time. And like be to the point where I have to, it's like my body forces me to like, if I don't take breaks, my body will force me to. So I'm just gonna also say that, and like, especially for folks who are interested in higher education, just want to let y'all know, like, this is my experience and stuff like that.
Hi, this is Javin. I want to echo something that Jordan said earlier, which was um, I miss working for the DCC because I miss having disability culture be part of my work experience, and my department, I would say, is pretty like liberal, left-leaning, like focusing on health outcomes research, particularly also for like sexual and gender minorities, and we're definitely like being affected by all that's going on in Washington, the federal government, terminations of grant contracts, all of that. But still, like as Jordan said too, the DEIB is like a big focus of our department, but the A is never like considered or thought of. And um, but yeah, so I just wanted to point that out as well. So in terms of the actual question, how is your position working out now? It's worked out and somewhat worked out for me. As I mentioned earlier, my position, or and when I got my job, I waited like a week or two until I actually submitted the form to request accommodations, and then it took maybe like a week to just get them settled. And then I was grateful. I was very privileged that my supervisors approved everything I asked for. And just to give some examples of what I ended up getting as accommodations, and keeping in mind I'm also a salaried employee, expected to work 37.5 hours or technically 40 hours a week. The accommodations I got um, were, what did I get? 15-minute breaks every hour. And also keeping in mind the salary, I have a fixed working window of 9 to 5, and basically they have to, if I work outside of those hours, they have to like make a plan with me to sort of make up the work if that's the case. I'd say the major one, or let me see, I think I have it pulled up here, so I'll check that I have it. Um, I also have work from home as needed, which is really helpful. Our department is Mondays and Fridays work from home as it is, but my chronic illness doesn't work on Mondays and Fridays only, so or doesn't activate on those days only. So I can just, sort of tell my supervisor, hey, like I can't come in today, I'll be working remotely, and she says, thanks for letting me know, and that's it. And then the other one, this is perhaps the most salient one for me, is I work half days in the office by default. So basically, I work from 9 to 1 in person for the 3 days that I'm in the office, 9 to 1 in person, and then I have an hour break that's considered my lunch as well, where I commute home, and then I work remotely for the rest of the day until 5. And that's been a really, great set of accommodations, and it's helped me do my work to the best of my ability, and also like just be less stimulated in my office environment and all of that as well. Um, I think a lot of people don't, even to this day, probably don't understand why I go home for half days, or they kind of just make assumptions about it, like, oh, like Javin's just going home, why don't I get to go home, that kind of thing. And like also part of me, like part of my situation is that I'm a manager of a small team, having never worked full time before. In general, it's like my first real like full time job. So it's quite a dynamic I have. And so I mean, so my perspective is like some people probably think that I have special treatment in the office or something, and they don't know it's for disability reasons. And I mean, to be honest, and for me, it's more so the manager part of it rather than the disability part of it, but it's definitely affected like my relationships with others. Like I work well, and I've only ever been like, you know, a good worker in my office space and everything, but sometimes people can be, passive aggressive, or, they, I don't, for whatever reasons they might have. And one thing I've had to remind myself constantly since the 8 months I've been out at this job, and it's not been very I mean, I like the core functions of my job, but there's other stuff that has not been that great. What I remind myself is like, and again, also being in a higher ed institution, like it's my legal right to have these accommodations, and so people can have their opinions about, you know, what I get that makes my life and my ability to do my work. Like I get these accommodations allow me to do my work to the best of my ability, and they're approved. And my supervisors, understand it. I mean, and people who are at my level or at a different level than me don't necessarily need to understand it, because it's not their problem. Like it's or not problem. It's not, again, it's my legal right to have it. That's why I have to remind myself all the time, because sometimes I get to the point where I'm like, people are again like very can be passive aggressive a lot of the times, and I'm just like, I did nothing to you. But I remind myself, like, this is what I'm granted. This is where I'm at. I've had this for a long time. It is their problem if they have any mixed feelings about it. If it's not my issue. And that's the perspective I had to take, unfortunately. But that's what you got to do in the workplace sometimes is like, have, I think a lot of folks here like announced it as like having boundaries, right? No one's ever like, what's a good thing is that no one's ever forced me to like be like, oh, no one's ever asked me directly, like, why do you go home for half days, or tell me about your disability, or, or make us like, but they do probably question, I get the vibe that they do is like, why does Javin get to do this? Whereas like, I have to stay here all day, you know? And yeah, so that's been my experience. It's been kind of a mixed bag. Like I've got the accommodations I needed, but the social dynamics as a result didn't pan out as well as I'd hoped. Um, Again, there's other factors for that too, but I'm still at the end of the day grateful that I went through the process and did them as I had done for many years in school. Um, like I'm glad that I have them, and it's made my work life a lot better than it would have been, I think. So yeah, so it is technically working out, but it's not like, black and white or anything. It's kind of a mixed bag.
Jordan just put in the chat, I forgot to mention, it helps me that my office is one of the few that fought to stay hybrid at my campus. Great.
Can I add something? This is Sylvie. Um, just what you just said, Javin, reminded me of all the sort of self-regulating and self-policing that I was doing. Um, that yeah, so let me be specific. When I started my job, I was using a wheelchair some of the time. And on my first day, I brought the wheelchair to work and I didn't get out of it the whole day. And then on my second day, I said, what's going to happen if I go to work and get out of my wheelchair? People think that I use my wheelchair all the time. And for the first couple months, maybe not months, maybe weeks, I don't know. For the first while, I was really concerned about this perception of my wheelchair use and thinking I would remind myself, like, oh, don't get up, even if I could, because I didn't want it to become a thing. Um, and then as I got to know people better, and I also didn't want to keep um, using the wheelchair when I didn't need it, um, I started just getting up and walking around some of the time. And it turned out that nobody really had anything to say about it. Um, Now, does that mean that nobody thought something about it? No. I mean, maybe somebody had their own ideas, or maybe they were making fun of me in their head. But the reality was that my fear of what other people were going to say was way worse than what actually happened. Um, and I would just, I think the older I've gotten, the more I've learned that people are really not thinking about you as much as you think they are. Everyone is a little self-involved and thinking about themselves and what they want. And so things like, will somebody notice if I'm using a different mobility device? Or like, will somebody notice if I leave early or if I come in late? Um, Absolutely, sometimes yes, but a lot of the times, no. A lot of the times it's like more in our own head than it is, um, depending on the culture of work. Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else want to add anything before we change over to Q&A?
I think just one last thing to like hop off of what Sylvie just said. This is me. I think along similar lines, it's like something that I've noticed is like this is also throughout like my school experience as well. It's like that self-policing like happens with the self-shaming of just like being shaming myself into silence of like my experience and my validity and like, oh, well, like I didn't turn this assignment in on time and I like didn't have a chance. I didn't have the executive function to like plan in advance and like let my professor know to ask for an extension like a week ahead of time. Or like I didn't let my supervisor know that like I wasn't feeling well today so that I didn't show up to my in-person office hours like on time. Um and like it feels very like sometimes high stakes and consequential and like sometimes it is, but also it's like the most important thing that I've learned is that like communication is like the most important thing. Like if I can't show up to work because I wake up that day and like 30 minutes before my office shift I'm like getting out of bed and I'm like I cannot do this, then like yeah, is it gonna suck? And like will it be sometimes inconvenient for folks? Like yes, but I'm also going to be communicative about this. And like I've received a lot of feedback that that is generally like the most important part rather than like me hasn't shown up to the his office shift and also I have heard nothing. It's like I don't know what's going on. Like is he okay? Did he quit? Like what's going on? And like I think the self-shaming ourselves into silence is also just like another form of like internalized ableism and like white supremacy and oppression that like we allow to like exist. And so it's like reminding myself like, okay, let me just say the thing that feels shameful. And usually it's fine.
Thank you. Anything else from folks before we turn it over? Great. Okay, so I am going to stop recording.